I'm so encouraged and delighted to get to be here with you. And I pray this will be a holy time. I pray that the Lord will show us the light of His face, that He would face us, and that we will be given faces to carry His light through our own dark nights and then out into a darkened world. Amen. So speaking of faces, my friend Dan is a theater teacher. And I remember him saying to his students, because they were reciting their lines like this, they're looking down at their feet. And he said, guys, he would stop them and he would say, "You've got to give me your faces. Your face is where you live. You've got to give me your faces." So I just want to take a second before we go any further, and I want to kind of create a moment together, us to create a moment together to see each other. And I know we've got masks on, so half of our faces are kind of missing, but we'll do the best we can. So just look around you and make eye contact with somebody. And then look up here and make eye contact with me. I want to see your faces, even you. You know this quote, "You've never met a mere mortal, have you?" Right now in this very room, you are surrounded by immortal creatures created by the Holy Trinity to live forever within the loving union of that eternal family. So with that in mind, look again. Do you know what the word respect means? It means to respectate. It means to look again. So respect the beings around you in whose hearts God has set eternity. Look again. Look again. Now, how does it make you feel to be seen in that way? Does it make you feel embarrassed? Yeah? It can be kind of hard to make eye contact, right? Did you find yourself spontaneously smiling or maybe awkwardly laughing a little bit as you tried to look around? Well, friends, those are all appropriate things, kind of even sweet things to feel. There is an awkward sweetness and a kind of dear shyness that halos the face. The face is the orienting point for our humanity. God has designed it for Himself. The plan from before the creation of the world was always to become one of us. And so He made us to be just the right kind of creature to suit Him when He'd put on flesh. And the face is tailor-made to manifest God's light or glory. If humanity is the crown of creation, what is the crown of a human? Where do you put crowns? On the head. And the head bears the face. All right? So just quickly, because this could be its own talk, I want to mention that if facing is the version, what would the perversion be? There's always a perversion to every version. The go-to example of defacing would be pornography, which in our culture is not exceptional. Unfortunately, it is indicative. What I mean is, in a culture like ours that sees people as a means to an end or merely useful objects, of course pornography would flourish. But defacing shows up in little ways too, even in something as seemingly harmless as interrupting. If I'm a bad listener, it might mean I've got a habit of thinking of others as only existing to hear what I have to say. But God is calling us to respect the dignity that He's invested here. And that's a part of our Christian command to do justice. So back to facing. Everything God has created has a kind of face. Dogs have a face, right? Flowers have a face. But we find something different in a human face that's missing everywhere else. There's a kind of light. It's the light of personhood, the image of God. Adam looked for it in all of the animals when he was naming the animals, and he couldn't find it. But then he saw Eve's face, and he said, there it is. That's different. When we face another person, there's a part of us that wants to bow. And I think that's the embarrassment we feel. Is a good embarrassment because we're making contact with something that has a depth of significance that we cannot possibly comprehend. Thomas Howard says, the body is the epiphany of the Spirit. The body is the epiphany of the Spirit. Some unfathomable immaterial reality is manifesting in materiality. The person makes an appearance. And the face is the epicenter of that epiphany. So it's okay to feel a little awkward trying to keep eye contact with that kind of brightness. It's natural. Okay, so staying with the theme of faces, let's look at a very familiar phrase from the Bible. There's this common refrain in the Psalms and then all across the Scriptures that has to do with God's face. Can you think of it? It's a prayer. Lord, make the light, make the light of your face or your countenance shine upon us. But what does it mean for a face to shine? Like, is it a real oily face? Like maybe like super sweaty face. It's real shiny. Well, guys, has anybody ever told you, boy, when she walked in the room, your face lit up? Or girls, when that number showed up on the caller ID, right? Your face starts to glow. We see this pattern show up in creation. When we look at flowers, don't we? They look up and they see the light of the face of the sun and they bloom. But now let's flip this, okay? Let's flip this. I want you to imagine God's face lighting up when you walk in the room. For a face to shine, it means for it to be a glad face, a bright face, a smiling face. It's kind of sad that we have to wear these masks that cover up our smiles. In fact, the word glad in its ancient roots means to shine. That's why the Hebrews pray that when they look at the face of their God, they might discover that He's smiling at them. A smile is life-giving, isn't it? Okay? So here's the idea. I want to let that idea set the stage for what I want to talk about this morning, because I'm bringing up faces right now to say that if we are trying to live as artists in God's family, we need the light of God's face, or we will lose touch with reality. And most often, God makes that light available through His body, through people. We need His face, and we need His face in other people's faces. We need to create in relationship. We need to collaborate. So in the time we have together this morning, I want to talk about learning to live and to make art in light of faces. So 3 things, okay? Number 1, this is an acquired taste. It doesn't come naturally from me or easily. We live in such an individualistic culture, right? This is going to be hard to get used to. Number 2, but this is how we are made. Humans are made to face and be faced by others, right? And I'm going to talk about 3 images that help me think about this. And then number 3, collaboration is God's way. It's how the Trinity, the very foundation of reality, gets things done. And God is asking you to do more than you can do by yourself. So let me start by telling a couple of personal stories about how I began to acquire a taste for collaboration. So I'm a songwriter. And the first album I recorded out of high school was not very good. But I was so excited about it, right? I was so excited. And I invited my old youth minister to listen to it. And I really looked up to this guy. I was so eager for his approval. But the first thing he said was a question. He said, "So on this song, did you play the drums on this song?" And I was like, "Yeah, I played every instrument on this album." And he paused for a second, and I waited. I was hoping he'd be, impressed by that. And then he said, "Why didn't you, get a real drummer who could really play that to do it?" And my heart just sank, right? And my cheekbones burned with embarrassment and conviction, honestly, and discouragement. And then he said, "Matthew, the whole point of music is collaboration. Music is the joining together of various voices to make a whole song. That's music's form. It's the essence of music. And I had gone against what music is, and the music suffered. And as painful as it was, he was right. I was trying to do everything myself. And part of that was just plain pride. Part of that was a lack of experience, lack of resources. But honestly, I just never really thought about it. I didn't have much experience with collaboration of any kind. I hadn't developed a taste for collaboration. I think it's great when kids grow up getting to play in symphonies or on sports teams or even theater troupes. These kinds of things prepare the imagination for shared work. But I didn't have much of that growing up. So a year or two later, I worked at a summer camp in Memphis, Tennessee called Service Over Self. It's an urban home repair camp. And there were about 50 staff from all over the country. And we lived in one building, and about 200 campers came in every week. And we worked hard. And we worshiped. And we ate together. I had never been a part of anything like this. And I couldn't get enough. I ended up working there 6 or 7 summers over a 10-year period. I'd never been a part of a team, and it was beautifully addictive. I remember having a sort of epiphany one of those summers. These 50 staffers were so diverse, but I looked around and I saw everybody moving in this amazing kind of unity. And I thought, this is not possible. This doesn't happen. And then I thought, okay, the only explanation I can come up with is if all 50 of these people are hearing the same voice. If they're all united under the Holy Spirit, a common authority. To be a part of a healthy body in Christ like that was so exciting to me. That was my first taste of collaboration. And since then, going back to making music, I've realized that my own music becomes so incredibly boring to me when I do everything myself. Nothing surprises me, nothing delights me, because all of the ideas came from my own head. On the other hand, when I invite people into the process, ideas and melodies and harmonies and rhythms and colors emerge that I never would have thought of. The music becomes generative and surprising because I get to experience the gift of new life being birthed from within the matrix of that creative communion. The art is less of me looking at myself in a mirror and more of me getting to delight in the faces and the voices of the ones I have come to love and enjoy. So for you, are there experiences in your life that have helped you acquire a taste for collaboration? Can you feel some resistance to it, maybe? Remember, our culture teaches us to be self-made, self-sustained, rugged individualism, right? But that is not the shape of reality. It's a malformation. So you may take a little time today to journal at some point and ask yourself, what experiences have you had that help you imagine what it could be like to serve someone else's project? or to invite other people in with their gifts to bear on your work. Now, let's move on. Let's look at how God has made us for this. And I want to start with an incredibly obvious clue. It's built into our bodies, but it's so close it's hidden in plain sight that we probably don't see it. But let me ask you, where are your eyes located? It's like asking a baby, like, where's your nose? You're like, your eyes are here, right? Your eyes are on your face. But are your own eyes very helpful when it comes to actually seeing your own face? This is kind of hilarious to me that we can't use our eyes to see ourselves. Obviously, at this point in human history, we have technologies that allow for it. But the natural order is that we are invisible to ourselves. The physical design of the human body is that we face outward and away from ourselves. Your face is built that way, right? So what can we do? How do I find out who I am? What do I look like? I have made an appearance in this world, but I can't even see myself. So we do need mirrors. We need mirrors, but understand this. What you call a mirror, that thing in your bathroom, that's not really a mirror. That's an analogy for the real thing. And the real thing is someone else's face. Let me say that again. The thing in your bathroom that you call a mirror is not a mirror. It is an analogy for the real thing. The real thing is another person's face. What does Paul famously say? For now we look in a murky mirror, but what we're longing for is to see face to face. The only way to see yourself is to see someone else seeing you. We are built in such a way that we must go looking for other faces, and when we see someone seeing us, they face us with their face. Their face becomes the thing that gives us our face. We see ourselves only by being seen by another. And ultimately, we long to see the light of God's face. And I'm sure you've read Lewis's Till We Have Faces. Orul's journey in that book is a journey to a face that shows her own face, which has been forever veiled from herself and from others. So I hope you can think of your own face, which you carry with you everywhere you go, hopefully, as a concrete reminder that you are made to interface with others in your creative work. You need those other faces to see and to understand yourself, your gifts, and your creative work. When it gets dark, look for the light of those faces. Before we go on, I want to mention two other examples that help me remember that we're made for collaboration. And the first is the word stranded. And the second is this idea of echolocation. Stranded and echolocation, okay? So, stranded. I love this word. It's been so helpful to create a picture for me to understand my need for people the last few years. When a thread is pulled out of a cloth, it becomes a single, lonely strand. It is stranded. We are meant to be woven into a family, knit into the fabric of parents, siblings, spouses, and friends. And if we get pulled from that fabric, we lose the ability to detect the patterns of reality. Now that sounds really dramatic, but I bet you know from experience how true it is. Depression feeds on strandedness. Despair gets its power from seeing one narrow thread of what is possible and mistaking that for the whole pattern. So a big part of fighting the darkness is learning to face it together. We have to refuse to normalize strandedness. But if you think of yourself as a thread, if you are woven into a fabric, then that means other threads are going to be making contact with your thread. You may not want those sad, fearful, or ashamed parts to come into contact with those other threads, right? Those other lives. So we have to be brave. We have to allow that interweaving to take place so that we can be knit into a family that can support us and show us how we belong in the larger pattern of reality. Now let me give one more picture that I find helpful. It's echolocation. It's like this sort of spiritual sonar. Humans very literally lose touch with reality when they're stranded. Reality is, think about this, reality is discerned by synthesizing multiple sources of knowing. Have you ever heard the story about the 5 blind guys who are feeling the elephant in different places, right? And they're trying to figure out what it is. Well, the reason that story works is because we get the benefit of having all 5 points of contact synthesized as we hear the story. We see the elephant. If the 5 blind guys sat down and had a conversation, they could put together the whole picture and discern elephant, right? But that's how we work. We have ongoing conversations within this pool of relationship where we send out the sound of our voice. And then we listen for how it returns to us on any given subject. And in this way, humans sort of echolocate themselves in reality by speaking and by listening. But without being in a conversation, we can't tell where we are in relation to things. And that gives us a deep sense of dislocation or chaos. That is terrifying. We grope in a deafening darkness filled only with the noise of anxiety. So can you see these 3 pictures? They're all kind of saying the same thing. Facing each other with faces, strands interweaving, and voices calling out that we need to hear other voices in order to get our bearings in reality. When I'm lost, I call out into the darkness and I say, "Is anybody there? Can anybody hear me?" And then I hear the voice of a friend say, "Yes, I'm here with you." That's when I begin to know where I am, when I hear that voice respond. So thinking about how we assemble a picture of reality by staying in conversation with people. So we've looked at how that affects us personally. But how does it affect our art making directly? Well, we've all seen artists whose work was embarrassingly bad. But that artist was totally oblivious, right? Have you seen this? I went to this art show night once, and somebody read this terrible poem that they'd written. But they were so confident as they read this poem, they had no idea. They had no idea. Everybody's biting their knuckles. Their work suffered because it was removed from conversation with others. At least they shared it. That was a good first step. But I was that oblivious artist when my old youth minister called me out about collaboration while listening to that first album. And I'm sure each of us has been that oblivious artist. And we're thankful for our conversation partners because they help us grow. They help us push on towards a more beautiful, a truer embodiment of our craft because they call us to press into reality. Malcolm Guite says, "God bless the interweaving of our ways." God bless the interweaving of our ways. And he's right. God does bless us when we face him and when we face others, as we interweave our lives by the help of the Holy Spirit, and as we learn to speak and to listen well in conversation. These are ways we let his light in and that we become ourselves carriers of that light. So we've looked at acquiring a taste for collaboration. Then we looked at 3 images: facing strandedness and echolocation, and these help us think about how God has crafted us for participation in reality, which is only possible through relationship. And now, lastly, let's look at some kind of practicalities of our calling. There's a great proverb, Proverb 14:4. I think it's important here. It goes like this: where there are no oxen, the manger is empty. But with the help of oxen, there is an abundant harvest. Let me say that one more time. Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty. But with the help of oxen, there's an abundant harvest. Let me say something I hate to hear. God will give us work to do that exceeds our capacities and our capabilities. Let me say that again. God will call you to do things that you cannot get done by yourself. Why would He do that? Because need drives us outside of ourselves and into relationship. Need is a gift from God. Need existed before the fall. It's supposed to be there. Need is one of the things God called good when He created the world. If I could do everything myself, I would. And I would be incredibly lonely. I've tried that, by the way. I'm still learning. Loneliness is a kind of hunger that tells us to go get the nourishment we need from relationships. Loneliness is to the soul what hunger is to the body. So, learn to see loneliness not as a sin. Learn to see loneliness as a friend who is trying to give you good advice. So when God gives us a calling that we cannot possibly accomplish with our own resources, that means that in order to obey Him, we will have to go outside of ourselves and ask for help. Remember our proverb, this field is too big. There's no way I'm going to be able to plow and plant and harvest this thing by myself. If I want to get this album made, if I want to get this book edited, or this website redesigned, or this kitchen remodeled, or these kids raised, I'm going to have to involve other people in this work. I'm going to have to yoke myself to some collaborators, right? But this is hard. I don't like this part either. But that means your work really becomes partly theirs, doesn't it? That is hard for an artist to share ownership. But we have to learn, and I mean really allow others real participation. That kind of generosity and vulnerability, which may be the same thing, is something that we need to be praying for one another. It's a big challenge. And of course, God leads by example, doesn't He? The servants are not greater than their master, so we ask, how has God done this? How has our Creator involved us in His creative work? Well, He's given life to the cosmos, and He's invited us to be yoked to Him in its development, its cultivation, and its flourishing. Get this, even God asks for help. Not because He's limited, but because He loves to involve other people. That makes His joy complete, as the New Testament phrase goes. But this is wild. He doesn't micromanage. You ever had someone micromanage you? Super fun. He doesn't micromanage. A real gift is given without strings attached. Think about whatever material you work with as an artist. Part of what gives you joy is getting to know that material. You didn't invent the material, it was given to you. And you're learning to collaborate with it within its given properties. For example, the sculptor does not decide what clay is. She learns to submit to its God-given nature and collaborate with it. That's part of the joy of making things. But what you make with it, that's really up to you. That's really up to you. That means your labor in the Lord is never in vain, like Paul says, because Whatever work you do is an actual participation in reality, something that branches out into eternity. This is a hard thing to wrap our minds around. But there's this little passage from good old Professor Tolkien in his essay on fairy stories where he describes the despair that an artist feels when they look at all the art that's come before them and they say, what is the point? What is the point in making one more song or painting or screenplay or poem? It's all been done. And Tolkien says, no, that is not true. That is not true. He says we have to distinguish between likeness and sameness. And he says the tree has produced leaves like the leaves that have come before, but these are not those same leaves. These leaves have never existed until this moment. This is why we must go on making, because every leaf that buds is truly unique. It's a never-before-seen expression of the everlasting tree. Listen, the story is the same, but each telling is truly new. Things like it have happened, but this is not the same. God has given us real ownership in His work. That is not an illusion. He wants an abundant harvest, and so He's yoked us to Himself. That's the example we follow in our own creative process. But in order to faithfully accomplish that unique embodiment of the everlasting story in our own life and in our own life art forms, we've got to understand that the work is more than we are capable of doing on our own. And that is by design. It's supposed to be that way. Oxen are expensive. You got to feed them. You got to take care of them. What a massive hassle. But you can't get the work done without them. You need a team. You got to hire some ranch hands. And this is how reality is built. It's built to be collaborative because it's built in the image of the Trinity. Think about the parable of the sower. You want to be good soil? You want to have an abundant harvest? You think you can do that alone? You're fooling yourself. You've got to let others enter into the work with you to mutually indwell your calling. Choose people you can trust. That's important. And then, really trust them. Be brave, be generous, and be vulnerable. But what a terrifying, seemingly unwise idea. But that's what Jesus does. That's how He does it, right? What else is the church but God yoking Himself to a bunch of folks who are stomping around clumsily like dumb oxen? But we won't be able to be truly human or true artists until we accept His invitation to share the workload by first taking on His yoke and then the yoke of being joined to His body, the church. Okay, so we looked at 3 images that teach us about our relational need, and then we just talked about how we've got to follow God's example and learn to be yoked together with collaborators. And that our work is a real participation in ultimate things. But we started all this talking about the face. We started talking about how we can only see ourselves when we see someone else seeing us. And I want to kind of end where we started. I think everything comes back to that. So the last few years, I have been absolutely fascinated with John 4, the woman at the well. And I'm not going to go through that whole story in detail, but I think this is an instance of what we've been talking about with the face. So I want you to imagine this woman. She is the town slut. She's already had 5 husbands. She's working on number 6. She sees herself muddy in the mirror of the faces around her. She is stranded from a healthy social fabric. She is called out to locate herself, and the voices that came back were either cold in their silence or cruel. She is lonely, which is another way of saying thirsty. She is very thirsty. She has dried up 5 wells. And today she goes to a well and she finds another man. But this man doesn't wait for her to send out her voice. He speaks first to her, and he locates her in conversation with himself. And then he goes on to touch all of the ragged strands of her threadbare life. He is interweaving himself with her shame. And finally, as the encounter gets more and more uncomfortable, she wriggles and she squirms to keep from having to face this man. And she picks up her jar to leave. But then something amazing happens. She does face him. At the last second, she turns and she sees him seeing her. Lord, make the light of your face to shine upon us. We are desperate for peace. If only God would smile upon his people, we would bloom like the flowers of the field. And we are not given a description of what the woman at the well sees. We are only allowed to see what happens because of what she sees. She blooms like a virgin bud facing a gladdening light. She sees Jesus seeing her. And in his face, she sees herself truly as God's bride. And this is too good to mention, okay? Your very own Esther Moon recommended Robert Alter's writing and pointed out that in the Bible, typically, when you see a man and a woman run into each other at a well, guess what's going to happen next? Somebody's getting married. So this woman has been through 5 husbands. She's working on number 6. She runs into a man at a well. And what number is he? 7? Jesus is the Sabbath. And Jesus is her last and final Sabbath husband. This poor, worn-out woman can finally rest. Come on. Is the Bible not beautiful, y'all? Is Jesus not beautiful? Is the gospel we've been given not incredibly beautiful? May we all hear Jesus' proposal, his proposal, and be set free like this woman. Which leads me to this. I want to see what she saw. As artists, as collaborators with God himself, our job is to go sit at that well and face the Lord, to let his light fill us, and to take that light to a world withered from thirst. But we have to be pioneers, intercessors. What I mean is, we have to go there ourselves or we will have nothing to give. Our work will have little light in it. At the same time, we're not naive. The world avoids the face of Jesus because it prefers the darkness, because its deeds are evil. That's how Jesus explained it to Nicodemus. He was drawn to the light of Jesus' face in the dark of night, but not everyone is. Many work to deface Jesus. Still, there are others like the woman at the well who are afraid to, or maybe they don't even bother to look because they lack the imagination. They can't imagine the face of God could ever possibly be happy to see them. And that's why, more than any gimmick or advice I could give, what I want to leave you with today is an encouragement to keep turning your face toward God. He has made the light of the knowledge of the glory of God appear in this world in the face of Jesus Christ. This is a dark time in the world, and artists have a great light to bring. We can help populate hopeless imaginations with stories of possibility. So because God has made the light of his face to shine upon us, let's work together to carry that light in every creative labor we undertake. Every little never-before-seen leaf that we body forth from the everlasting tree needs to come into the world. Because Tolkien says, even though oaks have put forth leaves for countless generations of men, for someone out there, this may be the embodiment, the first they've ever seen, the first they have ever recognized. Beloved, the roots of the family tree of God extend beyond the walls of this world and backwards before the dawn of creation. And now we are branches extending into this time, this place, this present darkness. And the leaves of that tree are for the healing of the nations. May I pray over us a short blessing to close. May your destiny lead to the world without end, and your eyes fix on joy that is worth a cross. May you bless those to come with a song born of faith. May the sword of your tongue slay every lie. May your face be like rain for the dry hearts of men, and your hands train the soil for good fruit. May your hearts ever burn for the voice of the Christ, with his grace ever enthroned within your flesh. And may the royal blood of righteousness pulse in your veins. May you bend like your Lord to lift the least. And at the end of your strength, may you find heaven's peace. May your love, your art, your life make Jesus plain when they see your face. Amen. Thank you.